Believe it or not, it's been nearly 3 years since the release of Dead Island 2. Between that time, I've gotten married and had my first kid. It's just crazy how fast time flies. Anyway, with the release of Dying Like the Beast, I wanted to pay some of the older titles another visit with a fresh pair of eyes. See, I've played through Dead Island 2 about a year ago, and honestly, I enjoyed my time with it. Was it incredible? No. But was it a fun 20 hours or so? Yeah, I would say so. Dead Island 2 did decent enough critically, netting a score of 73, and in a very rare occurrence, the user score aligns with the critical reception almost perfectly, scoring a 7.2. So it pretty much seems like everyone was in agreement that the game does nothing special, but was good enough to give it a playthrough if you're into that genre, that is. Now, in this video, I wanted to give the game a playthrough once again and share my updated thoughts on the various systems, the gameplay, and the narrative. By the end of the video, you'll have a pretty good idea as to whether or not this game is for you. Now, the Dead Island series is like the sillier cousin of the Dying Light franchise, and that holds true for just about every aspect of the game. Where Dying Light tries to be more serious and creates a more tense and scary atmosphere through its lighting and color palette, Dead Island is far more lighthearted with its use of bright and high contrast colors. Dying Light is more mature and more grounded in its narrative and delivery, but that doesn't mean I'm saying that the narrative is good for the whole series, by the way. I'm looking at you, Dying Light 2. And Dead Island is overall far less serious with jokes embedded into the dialogue and a more over the top story. I'm only mentioning these differences for the sake of viewers who come into the Dead Island series expecting something similar to Dying Light. The only thing that's the same between the two is that you're killing zombies with all sorts of creative and crafted weaponry. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into it. Most of these videos usually start with the story, the voice acting, and so on, but I'm pretty sure you're not here for any of that, so I'll be moving that section to the very end of the video. Dead Island 2 is a zombie slaying playground. That's really the best way to put it. It peaks when it leans heavily into its combat, and of course, it does that very often. While the actual combat is simplistic in the sense of there just being a light and heavy attack, it's the way the game layers different systems on top of the combat, such as the crafting, the elemental augments, and the perk cards, and so on, and all that really helps in creating something that in the end is fun enough. Combat is designed to keep you on your toes pretty much at all times. It's actually pretty fast paced coming from a game like Dying Like the Beast. I'll throw in comparisons here and there because it's the easiest thing to relate to. Dodging and swinging is often done in quick succession. The weapons available range from a large assortment of heavy blunt types to daggers and other slashing types. Also get access to guns about midway through the game, which really changes up the pacing in my opinion. Melee combat is, of course, the highlight of the game. Heavier weapons swing slowly but land with very satisfying impacts, often dismembering or crushing an enemy with big damage numbers. Other weapons can attack much quicker but output less damage per swing. It's a nice balance that gives different weapon types their own strengths and weaknesses. And of course, the gore system shines, and I think it's still one of the best that the Dead Island and Dying Light franchises has combined. I mean, the devs really went all out. Using a sword will have you slicing a zombie's legs or arms clean off. Using a crushing weapon will have you exposing the skull or the jawbone. It's pretty damn detailed, and you can get pretty creative with how you eliminate enemies. Now, the elemental system in Dead Island 2 is one of those layers of depth that elevates the combat beyond just being a simple hack and slash. You'll encounter weapons, environmental hazards, and even some zombie types that are imbued with various types of elemental properties. These include things like fire, shock, and acid. These elements interact with each other and with the environment in pretty satisfying ways. For example, you can douse a group of zombies in water and make them far more susceptible to electrical damage, allowing you to chain lightning attacks between them. Similarly, a well placed acid soaked weapon can cause continuous damage and even melt away the zombie's flesh, exposing their bones. The game obviously constantly encourages experimentation with these elements, leading to very dynamic and often unexpected combat scenarios. Now, I want to move on and talk about the perk system, which is basically the way you define your build. This is by far the most unique take on leveling that these games have seen, and I actually liked it more than I thought I would even the first time around. See, Dead Island 2 really lets you tailor your character to your preferred playstyle. Instead of a traditional skill tree that you'll see in a Dying Light franchise, where you'll either upgrade your combat or parkour abilities, you'll instead collect and equip these various cards that grant different abilities and passive bonuses. These cards are categorized into several types. You got your skill cards, which offer active abilities, like for example, a powerful drop kick or a protective block. Ability cards often modify core combat actions, such as increasing your critical damage or improving your dodge's effectiveness. There's also survivor cards, which focus on defensive and utility benefits, such as health generation, and also Newman cards, which will unlock powerful and unique abilities tied to your specific character's progression. What really makes this system engaging to me is its overall flexibility. I liked that you're really not locked into a permanent build. You can swap out these cards in and out on the fly, and you can experiment with a bunch of different combinations. I will admit that it's not the most in depth build system out there, but it's a much needed sense of progression. The constant acquisition of new cards, whether through exploration or completing quests, also ensures that you're always getting something new to try and keeps the gameplay fresh and rewarding. The system is a pretty interesting departure from the leveling mechanic that exists in other titles, and I would really like to see it return and expanded on quite a bit if Dead Island 3 ever makes it out. Now let's talk about the weapon crafting system, which is another crucial layer that complements the combat and elemental mechanics, which I've already talked about. Dead Island 2 gives you a ton of freedom to customize your weapons. You'll find workbenches pretty much scattered throughout the whole game world where you can upgrade, repair, and most importantly, you'll be able to craft modifications for your weapons. The crafting system allows you to imbue weapons with elemental effects, attach stat boosting modifications, and even add unique perks. For instance, you can take a standard baseball bat, add an electrocutor mod to it to give it shock damage, then add a reinforced mod for increased durability, and even add a speed demon perk for faster swings. This system is very similar to what we see in the Dying Light franchise as a whole, so if you're coming from those games, then you'll feel right at home. The components needed for crafting are often found by looting or completing quests and dismantling older and unwanted weapons. The sheer amount of combinations available means that you're always going to have something new to try. I wouldn't say that this is the best implementation of the crafting mechanic, and it's also not the most in depth. Generally speaking, I think Dying Light 2 actually holds that crown, and the version found in Dead Island 2 is still solid and accomplishes its intended purpose of giving you the freedom to craft whatever you want, but it doesn't evolve the formula in any way or do anything unique that hasn't been done before. Now, Dead Island 2 has a decent amount of enemies to fight. Beyond these standard shamblers and runners, the game introduces numerous special infected, each with unique abilities and weaknesses. Of course, you'll encounter the walkers and runners, which are basically the standard run of the mill zombies, but the game will also introduce more unique types, such as screamers, which will unleash cries that'll stun you and attract more zombies to your location, causing all sorts of hell to break loose if you do not kill them fast enough. Crushers are massive, heavily armored brutes that can take quite a bit to kill. Butchers are fast and relentless, and they have this unique mechanic where they can actually go and regenerate health, requiring you to kill them pretty quickly. I think overall the amount of different zombies you'll encounter is decent enough. Now, while Dead Island 2 isn't a true open world, its approach to map and level design is fairly solid. It's worth mentioning that this game doesn't have any parkour, and I'm not knocking it for that at all, as it was never mentioned or intended for it to have it in the first place. I only mentioned that for the sake of comparison. Now, the game itself is divided into several distinct zones, each representing a different iconic area of Los Angeles. These zones are connected by loading screens, but are decently expansive and well designed. All of them offer a good balance of linear progression and opportunities for exploration where you can find yourself new weapons, new blueprints, and so on. The game leans a lot into environmental storytelling, whether that be by walking into a room that's completely broken apart or through audio logs. I generally think that some of the areas in this game look really good. Now, mission design, particularly for the main story, largely revolves around moving from point A to point B, clearing out some zombie hordes, and interacting with survivors. The game will introduce variations of these core objectives, such as defending a location, retrieving specific items, or navigating hazards. It's worth mentioning that towards the end of the gameplay starts to feel a bit stale, mainly due to the fact that the objectives tend to start repeating. That being said, your tolerance for the combat will really determine if you're even willing to finish the game. There are only so many ways to kill or maim a zombie. Thankfully, for me, I found the combat fun enough to finish the game once, but a new game plus playthrough wasn't in the cards for me. Now, I mentioned earlier that I'd save the narrative for last, and there's a reason for that. While Dead Island 2 does well in its moment to moment gameplay and combat systems, the story is where things start to fall apart. The game obviously doesn't take itself too seriously, which is often a strength, but it also means the narrative isn't going to win any awards for depth or emotional resonance. You play as one of several immune individuals caught in the middle of a zombie outbreak in what is basically a quarantined Los Angeles. The overarching goal is pretty standard. You're going to find a cure, you try to survive, and eventually try to escape. The thing about the narrative is that it's very predictable and follows the same tropes we've seen time and time again. I'm not going to harp on this topic too long because I don't think this game was created with an engaging narrative in mind. The devs knew they wanted to create a zombie slaying playground and that the story was just something to move the player along. And that's pretty much all it serves, just as something to move you from area to area and mission to mission. I will just mention that if you're coming into Dead Island 2 hoping to play through a good story, then I will flat out tell you that you will not find it here. Overall, it's not terrible, but it's not good either. Now, the game has had a couple of updates that are noteworthy since launch, and it's safe to consider that the game is in a complete state, so to speak. Dead Island 2 has received several content updates and expansions. These additions have not only addressed player feedback and refined existing mechanics, but they've also introduced new areas, new storylines, and even gameplay elements. The most significant post launch content has come in the form of two major story expansions, those being House and Solo Festival. I actually did not play either of these, but I do know they extend the game's lifespan quite a bit by adding new enemy types, new weapons, and some more narrative for you to play through. I want to briefly touch on the technical performance, specifically on the PS5. Dead Island 2 generally runs very smoothly on PS5. Honestly, I think I was getting a smooth 60 frames per second for the majority of my playtime. There were occasional minor dips in some of the busier combat scenarios, especially when there's a lot of elemental effects going on, but those are rare and they hardly ever impacted the overall experience. Overall, I felt like the game performed very well, but ultimately the game wasn't that demanding to begin with. Coming back to Dead Island 2 after spending about 30 hours in Dying Like the Beast made me appreciate both games. Dead Island 2 is the perfect game to jump into and just have some mindless fun in. The combat is solid enough, the different weapon combinations that you can create help in keeping things fresh. The perk system is a nice change up from what the series has seen and helps in creating an experience that is more unique to your build. As mentioned, the story is pretty much there to move you along and not something that you'll ever get attached to. As long as you keep your expectations grounded, then you'll find a fun 15 to 20 hour experience here.